and welcome. My cat is on her way. You want meow? Hey, baby. There it goes. Come on, let's get your tail in here. There she is. Anyway, so for today's video, hi. For today's video, I kind of want to talk a little bit about genetics and not like what makes certain varieties or anything, but like the importance of them. I talk a lot about like pet store versus breeder rats versus rescue rats and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of times people think that it's just about the conditions they're being kept in this whatever facility they're housed in before they get to you. And it's way more than that. And it's way more than just genetics. There's a lot of reasons to reconsider getting pet store rats if you're going to get them. But I just kind of wanted to talk about what having rats from a breeder can be like. I will say no breeder. Some will try and convince you otherwise, but there's no breeder on the planet. You gonna go for it? You can go for it, babe. There's no breeder on the planet that can breed out every single issue that a rat can have. Some will claim it. In fact, I'll talk about that in a little bit. But your rat is going to have issues. The fact of the matter is, they only live 2 to 3 years. You're going to see them pass away after about 2 to 3 years. And they're going to pass away from something in all likelihood. It is very, very rare that you just come in and they have passed away when they're old and you have no idea what it is. So even if your rat gets certain conditions, that's not necessarily the fault of the breeder. So it's just a matter of how the breeder responds when you tell them what the issue is and things like that. So let's go ahead and get into it while my cat thinks about eating the pin again. You do. So we are going to start with my pet store rats, and these are rats that I personally, many years ago, I haven't gotten pet store rats in a long time, like 10 years, but these are rats that I personally went to the store and purchased. So, and I'm going to talk about them because I got them from 2 different stores. I got them from a PetSmart and a Petco, the same ones, and they were in the same area. So the rats that I got were from the same rodent breeding facility. And because they were from the same rodent breeding facility, they had the same issues as each other. Not all rats will have the exact same issues. Because rodents are produced at such a high scale, basically, hundreds of rodents born every single day at these rodent breeding facilities, they don't really take care to make sure the genetics are good, so they do have kind of the same issues. So I had a total of 16 rats that were from pet stores that I purchased from pet stores, because I've had rescues, and we'll get to why I'm not going to talk about my rescues in a second. I've had 16 rats that came directly from the pet store to me. I had a few that had questionable deaths, like that I don't really know what happened. I have some outliers that had like issues that don't fit the pattern. But for the most part, it was 1 or 2 things that took out my pet store rats. One was tumors. I had 5 rats that passed away due to mammary gland tumors. And the other thing was sudden onset respiratory problems that were probably linked to heart failure. And I had 6 rats pass away from that. And by sudden onset, I mean they were fine, and then they very dramatically were not fine, and then they passed away. And I had like no time in between when they stopped being fine and when they passed away to even attempt to fix them, because it was just so sudden. Now, I will say heart failure is one of those things that is pretty hard to diagnose, because vets really prefer to diagnose based on what they can see and not by trialing medicine. So you'll often get vets that want to do things like x-rays and stuff to diagnose heart failure. And to be quite frank, it is useless most of the time. However, it is very common for pet store rats to have heart failure. The youngest one of mine who had heart failure that passed away, she wasn't even 2 months old. I got her and she was in late stage heart failure the day I purchased her. And I didn't know, because this was very early on in my rat keeping. And I didn't even know heart failure was a thing with rats. So I just knew something was wrong with her, and my parents convinced me something wasn't wrong with her. And then she passed away. So she was probably 6 weeks old when this happened, because she was still in her baby coat. So when I got her, she was still in her baby coat. This was from Petco, and Petco sells them pretty young. Or they did back then. We're talking like over 10 years ago. And the second youngest was only 4 months old. So This is why pet store rats can sometimes be iffy, genetically speaking, because the rodent breeding facilities are not looking at genetics. They are meeting a demand, and the demand is very high because they're not just breeding pet rats, they are breeding feeder rats, and they are breeding rats to make frozen thawed rats. So they are breeding rats for snakes more than they are pets. Now we're going to skip all of my rescue rats before we get into the breeders, and the reason we're going to be doing that is because I do not definitively know where my rescue rats came from, and quite honestly, they come from all over. So rescue rats, they come from pet stores, they come from feeder bins, they come from feeder breeders, they come from backyard breeders, and they even come from reputable breeders. Because even reputable breeders, they will want you to sign a contract saying you will send your rats back to them, but it's really up to the owner to actually do that, and owners often don't. So any of these places can have a rat end up in a rescue. So we're gonna skip like rescue rats because trying to keep up with their genetics really isn't possible. They're from all over. Like of my rescues, most of them came from a rescue, but like Willow and Wellesley were born from rats that were found wandering a farm. Ducky and Dorothy were rats born in a hoarder house. The Weather Girls were from a backyard breeder. And then Baker and Barber were probably from a pet store. But again, we only have the owner's word that that's where they're from. So like rescue rats just come from all over. So we're skipping rescues. So let's get into the breeder rats. I've gotten rats from pretty much everywhere you can get rats because I was learning as I went. Simple as that. And my friend Kendra was along with me for most of it. So I actually have a lot of information on these rats because I'd get rats, she'd get rats. So we had multiple generations of rats from the same place. And that actually provided us with a lot of information on like what was likely to happen with them genetically going forward. So we're going to start with rats that came from, she was a new breeder and she was trying her best. Like she had good ethics, but she wasn't like good. And we're just going to call these the SCR rats. We're gonna for like privacy reasons. And so basically with these rats, I got two first. They were Rook and Rally, and then Kendra got three from Rook and Rally's mom's second litter. She actually got the mom and then two babies from that litter. And then Cappy's sister got three of those babies as well from the second litter. And of these rats, that is a total of 8 rats. All but 2 of them died from mammary gland tumors. Hermione, the mom, my rat Rook, Kendra's rats Artemis and Nyx. So all 3 of Kendra's rats from this litter, and then 2 of the boys all passed away from mammary gland tumors. And the other 2, my rat Rally had a stroke, and then the other one got HLD. He was very, very old. Genetically speaking, the mom was a link there because they had different dads, and yeah, all of them tumors. Even like the boy that didn't pass away from a tumor, he had one. He just also had HLD. We had also gotten other rats from this breeder. So Kendra had adopted the mom again, Persephone, and she adopted one of the babies, Fairlight, and I had gotten my rats, Daisy and Asher. All 4 of them tumors. All 4 of them. And they're from the same person. So these are different rats, different lines, but they might still be genetically linked. It was a tumor haven. It was just like crazy. Tumors all over the place. Now this was a newer breeder. She hadn't like worked out the kinks in her lines yet. I don't know where she had gotten her rats from because a lot of the more high-end breeders were blacklisting her because she didn't want a cull. So there's that. But yes, so she might not have been getting her rats from the best lines. Next we're going to talk about the Novas, which are, you've probably heard me talk about them before, but my friend Kendra, she got 2 rats from a feeder breeder, and the feeder breeder got attached to them and decided she was going to try and home them out as pets. And so she got Luna and Nova turned out to be pregnant, and she gave birth to 12 babies, 11 of which made it to adulthood. And we kept all 13 of these rats just in the family, so to speak. Kendra kept 6 of the babies, plus the mom and the aunt. I took 3, and Cappy took 2. So we have a lot of information about this group of rats because we had the whole family basically. So basically we know that half of them had some mild attitude problem, nothing severe. The worst was probably Humdrum, and she wasn't she was a grump, but she wasn't like Sailor or Thistle. She was just a grump, and a lot of them were like that. So all the boys were like that. And then Cappy's rat Wicket, and then Humdrum, all of them were like that. So the other thing they had was respiratory problems. It was very consistent that they had some respiratory problems, especially the one Kendra had more, so she had to deal with it a lot more. My girls weren't that bad except Merritt, who had so much porphyrin all the time. No matter what I did, her eyes were just always porphyrin-y. It was just her whole life porphyrin. And antibiotics didn't really help it. Nothing really helped, so I just kind of let her live her life that way, and I'd clean her up a little bit. And you know, she never really needed antibiotics. She never made respiratory noise or anything. It was just porphyrin. But because they had respiratory issues, Luna, Nova, Crane, and Tico, I believe, are the four. They ended up passing away from their respiratory issues. And then Hayes, Mercy, and Merritt, and Humdrum, and Ghost. Yes. Those 5 passed away from tumors. 3 of them had malignant tumors, and 2 of them just had normal mammary tumors. The 3 malignant ones were Ghost, Humdrum, and Merritt. And with all 3 of these cases, especially Merritt and Ghost, they developed tumors rapidly, one after the other, and they just kind of ballooned up. So, of the others, Kendra's other 2 boys, Lucifer and Graves, and then Cappy's rat, Wicket, all 3 of them developed pituitary tumors, and that's what they ended up passing away from. So, other than... And then there's Wookie, who's the outlier. She ended up getting HLD. She was otherwise perfectly healthy, but it was the HLD that ended up... we ended up having to put her to sleep because of the HLD. So, she's the only one that didn't have anything in common with her siblings when she passed away. So a lot of these issues were clearly genetic because they cropped up throughout the entire litter. Now here's where things get a little bit more interesting, because we're going to talk about another rattery I went to. This is the one where I got 6 of my rats, Cappy got 3 of hers, and Kendra got 2 of hers. And we're going to call them RCR for privacy reasons. So I got Sailor, Heidi, Riffraff, Hex, Warren, and Orville from them, and Cappy got Spectre, Lockley, and Grant, and then my friend Kendra got her 2 rats, Iris and Fable. Now, I got Sailor, Heidi, and Riffraff a year before Cappy and I got her 3 rats, and then Hex, Warren, and Orville, and then Kendra got her 2 a year after that. So we're talking multiple generations here, and a lot of the same issues cropped up for across the board. One, Sailor was still my most aggressive rat, and then Grant had attitude issues. Cappy likes to defend her, but we all know Grant had attitude issues. It's fine. Grant was nowhere near as bad as Sailor, though. They were both clearly from the same line. They were both black Silvermanes, and they looked very similar. So I do feel like that was passed down from previous generations. The other thing, this breeder was is one of the bad ones in the sense that, you know, things are going to happen. Things are going to crop up with your rats, health issues. And the breeder should be able to offer you advice, say, oh yes, this happens in this line, that sort of thing. And this breeder, every single time I told her something was going on, which was never anything minor, I only told her the big stuff, like the hormonal issues, tumors, things like that, things she might want to know about. And she would always be like, that's so strange. I've never had that happen with any of my rats, which she said about mammary gland tumors. So we have a pool here of 11 rats to talk about. 9 of them got mammary gland tumors. But somehow I'm supposed to believe that none of her personal rats ever got tumors. Sure. And none of her rats had aggression issues, and none of her rats had seizures, because Heidi had seizures. And none of her rats had respiratory issues, because multiple of ours had respiratory issues. So, yeah. None of them had any issues whatsoever. It's just our rats. Sure. But anyway. So as I said, 9 of them ended up with tumors. One of Kendra's rats and Cappy's rat, Grant, both ended up with tumors in very difficult locations that grew extremely fast. And in fact, Kendra's rat ended up having 3 operations because she got the tumor at 10 months old. And it grew so fast that it basically became almost an emergency situation, but she couldn't get spayed because the tumor was too large and in such a bad spot. And then it happened a second time only a couple months later, and then a third time only a couple months later, and that's when she managed to get the rats spayed along with her sister, because she didn't want the sister to go through the same thing. And it worked, thankfully. She hasn't had another tumor since. Will she get one? In all honesty, probably, because getting 3 mammary tumors like that back to back, it does not bode well for the future. They also had respiratory issues. So Heidi would make a lot of noise, and she just did this for the first year of her life, and then unfortunately she started having seizures, and she was put on prednisone, and she stopped making noise, which tells me there's some kind of inflammation going on, and the prednisone brought the inflammation down. And Cappy's rat Spectre was the same way, and these are from 2 different generations, but probably the same line because they're all the Silvermane line. And then Hex and Warren. Spectre, Hex, and Warren were siblings. All 3 of them had horrendous respiratory issues. That with Spectre, she ended up getting a pituitary tumor young and passing away. But with Hex and Warren, that is what ended up having me put them to sleep, is their respiratory issues, because no matter what I did, they just got worse and worse and worse over time. And at some point, I did have to call it for them. So for that, we are talking 3 generations of rats, all with the same issues from this one breeder. And again, issues are going to crop up. If she had been honest with us about the issues that were happening, then I wouldn't necessarily thought too much of it. But she wasn't honest, and that's what I don't like. Now finally, the final breeder we're going to talk about, we're going to call RRR, because, again, for privacy. And this is where I got the bugs. That's 4 of my rats. And Kendra got 7 of her rats from. And this is, again, over the course of multiple generations of rats, at least 3 generations of rats. So she got 3 boys from this breeder, and then I got my 4 girls, and then a year later-ish, she got 3 more girls from them. And so her boys, we'll talk about the boys first. Her boys, Oni and Spirit, related to my girl, Fifi. Her grandfather was their father, and they all 3 passed away from pituitary tumors. All 3 of them. So that is probably something that they did get from the grandfather. Some genetic thing they got from the grandfather passed down through all 3 of them. And then Kendra's other boy, his name was Wraith, and he was related to my rat Hopper. They were both Tonkinese. I believe they shared a father as well. And both of them passed away from respiratory issues very suddenly. He was a little bit older than Hopper was when it happened, but both of them did end up passing away from respiratory issues unexpectedly and suddenly. So the final 2 we're going to talk about for me were Honey and Bug. And then for Kendra, she had their nieces, Yarrow and Hemlock. And Bug unfortunately passed away young due to a nasal tumor, but Honey lived quite a while. She made it all the way to 2 years and 7 months. And she didn't even have a mammary gland tumor, neither did Fifi, who was the same age as her when she passed away, because this breeder's been around since the 90s, and her rats are very, very sturdy rats. And it was the same with Kendra's rats, who, one of them is still alive, the other has passed on, who are the nieces of my 2. Basically no issues. No mammary gland tumors, no issues, just going along. And then one of hers passed away from heart failure, which is the same thing that Honey passed away from, but were otherwise tanks before that. And the one she still has, not a single issue, just steady as can be. And these rats are from this breeder's oldest line, the one she has had the longest, and they are very sturdy, very healthy rats. And it was very clear to both me and her that they were just solid. And of my current rats, I don't really have that many in common with anyone. Cappy doesn't have rats anymore. Kendra lives in a different state. My friend Ashley does have a lot of rats from the same breeder that I have 4 of my dwarfs from. But I don't have, my dwarfs are very young, so, I don't have a lot of experience with their health issues. She does, but those are her rats. I won't talk about them here. But perhaps in the future I'll talk a little bit about that and see what we'll compare notes, and perhaps in the future I'll talk about it a little bit. Hopefully in the distant future, because 3 of my dwarfs from that breeder are only 4 months old, and I don't want to deal with health issues for a bit. Otherwise, most of my rats aren't from the same places. Fitz is my last Arizona rat. And then I have Suitor and Lamb, who are from the same breeder as Junimo and Joja. And there have been some very clear, consistent issues with rats from this breeder, one of them being their weight. So like Suitor and Joja both, no matter what I do, no matter how little I feed them, no matter how careful I am, they just seem to always gain weight. I could take them out of the cage during like dinner time, they still gain weight. Suitor's not even food motivated. She is one of my pickiest rats. The only one who's maybe pickier is Bonnet, who's very hesitant with new foods. But Suitor will straight up refuse food pretty regularly. So like the weight issue is one thing, and another thing is hormonal issues. So Curtains, Lamb, and Joja all had hormonal issues. Lamb I got spayed and it fixed it. Same with Curtains. Joja, being a dwarf, I'm not really comfortable spaying her, especially since she already has such a weight problem. But yes, I have noticed some consistent issues with these rats. If not for the hormonal issue, if you get rats from a breeder and they're consistently having hormonal issues, I would highly suggest finding a different breeder, because the breeder should be trying to breed away from that. You will get some no matter what, but if it's consistent, that's when I would get concerned. Because even a good breeder, like, you can't breed out hormonal issues entirely, so you'll still get one or two that are going to have hormonal issues, even if they're from a very good breeder. But the fact that 3 of the 5 I got from this breeder have hormonal issues or had hormonal issues, it's iffy. It's iffy. And then the Gravies, yeah, I don't have anyone in common with the Gravies. They came from a different breeder that I won't be going back to. And then, yeah, my dwarfs are, 4 of them are from my dwarf group. 4 of them are from a breeder that's been around a long time, produces really well behaved, like, just really solid, good rats. And then 2 of them are from a different breeder who also seems to have very good, sweet rats. But I don't really have anyone in common at the moment, so all of my rats I've talked about are from past situations, but I will happily, if I notice consistent things once I start using more from these current breeders I'm going to, if I start noticing more consistent things, I will talk about it happily. Oh, and then there's Baker, who is, again, probably from Petco. Most likely from Petco. And, like, I've mentioned this before. So I've had, if you include Baker and Barber, who were probably from Petco, both of them, if you include the 2 of them, I've had 18 rats that were originally from pet stores confirmed. And the most consistent and true thing I will say about my pet store rats is they either die young and suddenly, or they blast past 2 without an issue. And it was true with the 2 of them. Barber died young and suddenly, and Baker, he was a tank. I have not had a single problem with him. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating that it's so, it doesn't have to be like that. They could take more care, but they don't, because it's for a profit. But yeah, I will, if I in the future have like an update to this kind of stuff, I'll happily tell you. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed that video. And if you did, you know what to do. All the fun stuff down below. And I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye!